Welcome to Creepy Whispers. I'm Jack Thompson, and here we'll explore stories that will send chills down your spine. Get ready to dive into the unknown, where each whisper hides a secret. First story, man. I still can't explain what happened that night. It's been 5 years, but it still gives me chills just thinking about it. It was May 2018. I was 17 at the time and super excited to see A Quiet Place with my girlfriend Sarah and my little brother Kevin, who was only 10. We lived in Nashville, Tennessee, and decided to catch a late-night showing at a cinema near our house. I know Kevin was a bit young to watch a horror movie, but he'd been insisting for weeks, and we finally gave in. Little did I know we were about to experience real terror that night. We arrived at the cinema around 10:30 p.m. The place was pretty empty, since it was a weekday. We bought popcorn, soda, all that stuff, and went into the theater. I remember we sat somewhere in the middle, me between Sarah and Kevin. The movie started and everything was normal, you know? We were enjoying it. Kevin would occasionally get scared and grab my arm, but nothing major. It was only after about 30 minutes into the movie that I started to notice something strange. There was this guy, maybe in his 40s, wearing a heavy black coat that seemed too warm for the season. The weird thing was, he couldn't sit still. He kept changing seats all the time. At first, I tried not to pay much attention. I thought maybe the guy was just restless or something. But then I realized he was getting closer and closer to us. Like, he started at the back of the theater, then moved to the sides, and suddenly he was sitting just 2 rows behind us. I kept glancing back, trying not to let Sarah and Kevin notice I was uncomfortable. But man, it was really making me nervous. The worst part was, every time I looked back, the guy was staring right at us. It wasn't a normal look of someone watching a movie, you know? It was a fixed, kind of disturbing stare. I was trying to focus on the movie, but I couldn't. My mind kept going back to the guy in the black coat. At one point, Kevin whispered that he wanted to buy more candy. I told him to wait a bit, but he insisted. I ended up letting him go alone. After all, the candy counter was pretty close to our theater. But as soon as Kevin left, I felt a chill down my spine. The guy in the black coat stood up almost immediately and left the theater too. Man, at that moment, my heart started racing. I kept staring at the door, waiting for Kevin to come back, counting the seconds. Sarah noticed I was tense and asked what was going on, but I didn't want to scare her, so I just said I was worried about Kevin being alone. The minutes Kevin was out of the theater felt like an eternity. I was sweating. My foot wouldn't stop tapping on the floor. Sarah held my hand. I think she sensed something was wrong. I couldn't take it anymore. I got up and went to the theater door to take a look. When I opened the door, I saw the empty corridor. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. I left the theater and started walking down the corridor, looking in all directions. That's when I saw something that left me frozen. The guy in the black coat was standing in front of one of the empty theaters, trying to open the door. He didn't see me, but I was paralyzed for a few seconds, not knowing what to do. At that moment, I heard Kevin's voice calling me. He was coming back from the candy counter, all happy with a bag of gummy bears in his hand. When the guy in the black coat heard Kevin's voice, he quickly turned and started walking in the opposite direction, as if nothing had happened. I ran to Kevin, grabbed him by the arm, and went back to the theater as fast as I could. My heart was racing. I sat Kevin back in his seat and kept looking at the door, waiting to see if the guy would come back. Sarah asked what had happened. I could only say that I had gone to check if Kevin was okay. She looked at me suspiciously, but didn't push it. The rest of the movie was a blur to me. I couldn't pay attention to anything. My eyes kept going back and forth to the theater door. Kevin was calm, eating his gummy bears and watching the movie. Sarah, I could tell she was observing me from time to time, probably noticing that I was super tense. The guy in the black coat didn't come back to the theater, which made me even more nervous. I kept imagining if he was out there, waiting for us to leave. My head was spinning, thinking of 1,000 different scenarios, all of them bad. When the movie ended and the lights came on, I practically jumped out of my seat. I grabbed Kevin's hand and told Sarah we needed to leave quickly. She started asking questions, but all I could think about was getting us out of there as fast as possible. We left the theater, and I kept looking around, searching for the guy in the black coat. I didn't see him anywhere, but that didn't calm me down. We went straight to the parking lot. I was walking so fast that Kevin almost tripped a few times. I only managed to breathe properly when we got in the car and locked the doors. On the way home, Sarah finally got me to talk. I told her and Kevin what had happened, about the strange guy and how he had followed Kevin. Kevin got scared, said he hadn't noticed anything. Sarah was somewhere between worried and angry, thinking I should have said something to the cinema security. I know she was right, but at the time, all I could think about was getting us out of there. I drove home as fast as I could, constantly looking in the rearview mirror, afraid that the guy might be following us. When we got home, we woke up our parents. They were super worried and called the police. An officer came to our house to take our statement. I described the guy as best I could, but honestly, I was so scared that I couldn't remember many details beyond the black coat. The officer said they would investigate, that they would request the security camera footage from the cinema. But you know how it is, right? Days, weeks passed, and we never heard anything more about the case. I guess in the end it didn't lead to anything. In the days that followed, I could barely sleep. I kept replaying that night in my head, trying to remember more details, wondering what could have happened if I hadn't left the theater at that moment. Kevin had nightmares for a while, waking up in the middle of the night calling for me. Sarah became super protective, not letting Kevin go anywhere alone. Our parents even considered moving, but we ended up staying. Over time, things started to get back to normal, but that feeling of fear, that something terrible almost happened, never completely went away. 5 years have passed since that night, and to this day, I get a chill down my spine when I think about it. Sometimes, when I'm in public places, I find myself looking for that guy in the black coat. I know it's silly, that I'll probably never see him again, but it's stronger than me. This experience changed the way I see things, you know? It made me realize how close we can be to danger without even noticing. I've never been able to go to the cinema again without being alert, always paying attention to who's around me. It's strange how a single moment can change so much in our lives. To this day, I wonder who that guy was, what he wanted, and if he's done this to other people. These are questions that will probably never have answers, and maybe that's for the best. Second story, to this day, I can't explain what happened to me in that Los Angeles cinema. It's been over 10 years, but whenever I think about it, my heart races and I get that sinking feeling in my stomach. It was 2012, and I was going through a bit of a lonely phase in my life. I decided to do something I'd never done before, go to the movies alone. I thought it would be a relaxing experience, you know? I chose to watch a rerun of Jurassic Park, one of my favorite movies. I figured it would be perfect to take my mind off things. I arrived at the cinema on a Tuesday night, expecting to find at least a few people there. But the place was completely empty. I mean, I literally didn't see a soul except for the person at the ticket booth. I'll admit, it gave me a weird feeling, but I was determined not to let it ruin my night. I entered the screening room and chose a seat right in the middle, thinking I'd have the best view of the screen. The movie started, and for a while, I managed to focus on the story, forgetting a bit about the eerie atmosphere of the empty cinema. I was enjoying the movie, you know. Those dinosaur scenes always had me glued to the screen. But then, out of nowhere, I started hearing strange noises coming from behind me. At first, I thought it was just the movie sound echoing in the empty room, or maybe someone who had come in after me. I tried to ignore it, to concentrate on the screen, but the noises kept getting louder, more insistent. It was as if someone was moving in the rows behind me, but in a weird way, you know. It didn't sound like someone just adjusting in their seat or eating popcorn. The whole thing became so disturbing that I couldn't focus on the movie anymore. My heart started beating faster, and I felt this tension rising through my body. I kept debating whether I should turn around to look or not. What if it was just my imagination? What if there was nothing there? But what if there was? I was stuck in this dilemma for a good few minutes, trying to convince myself it was just paranoia. But the sounds continued, and they seemed to be getting closer. That's when I realized I couldn't ignore it anymore. I needed to look, if only to calm myself down and confirm there was nothing there. I took a deep breath, gathered all the courage I could muster, and turned around slowly. At first, I saw nothing but empty rows of seats. But then, in the blink of an eye, there it was. A dark silhouette abruptly stood up between the seats, about 5 or 6 rows behind me. I couldn't make out any details. It was just a humanoid shape, completely black, as if made of shadows. And the worst part, it was facing directly at me, motionless. I felt my blood run cold. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It was as if time had stopped at that moment. I don't know how long I stayed paralyzed, staring at that thing. It could have been seconds or minutes. I really lost track of time. But suddenly, as if a switch had been flipped inside me, panic took over. I jumped up, knocking over my popcorn and soda. I didn't even look back. I just ran. I ran as if my life depended on it. I stumbled on the stairs in the theater, almost fell, but didn't stop. My heart felt like it was about to explode in my chest. When I reached the cinema lobby, I expected to see someone, anyone, to ask for help. But there was no one. Not even the ticket booth attendant was there anymore. I ran out of the cinema onto the street, panting and shaking. I looked in all directions, searching for someone, anyone who could help me or at least confirm that I wasn't going crazy. But the street was deserted, with only a few cars passing in the distance. I stood there for a while, trying to calm down and understand what had happened. Had I imagined it all? But it seemed so real, so vivid. I could still feel the chill down my spine just remembering that silhouette rising up. After a while, when I managed to calm down a bit, I thought about going back to check. Maybe it was just someone playing a prank or something. But my body simply wouldn't obey me. Just thinking about entering that cinema again made my legs go weak. I ended up taking a taxi straight home. I spent the whole night awake, with the lights on, jumping at every little sound. The next day, I even thought about going to the police, but what was I going to say? That I saw a shadow in an empty cinema. They would think I was crazy or on drugs. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. I became obsessed, searching the internet about the cinema, looking for similar stories, anything that could explain what I had seen. I even passed by the place a few times during the day, but never had the courage to go in again. The cinema seemed normal, people coming and going, nothing out of the ordinary. This only confused me more. Had I really imagined it all? Over time, I tried to move on, but the event changed something in me. I couldn't go to the cinema alone anymore, and even when accompanied, I always chose seats near the exit. I kept looking back all the time, expecting to see that silhouette again. My friends started to notice my strange behavior, but I never told anyone the full story. How could I explain something I didn't even understand myself? Gradually, I started avoiding cinemas completely. I preferred watching movies at home, where I felt safe. But even then, sometimes, when the lights were off and I was alone, that feeling of being watched would come back. Years have passed, and I still can't explain what happened that night. I've tried to rationalize it in every possible way. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks, creating illusions due to fatigue or stress. Or maybe it was some kind of paranormal experience that I'll never fully understand. The fact is, that event changed my life in a way I never imagined. These days, I can watch movies at home without problems, but the idea of entering a cinema still gives me a knot in my stomach. The strangest thing is that, even after all this time, the details of that night remain vivid in my memory. The silence of the empty cinema, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the room, the strange noise coming from behind, and of course, that silhouette suddenly rising up. Sometimes I find myself wondering if I should have stayed, if I should have investigated more. But then, I remember the terror I felt at that moment, and I know I couldn't have done anything different. This experience taught me that there are things in this world that we simply can't explain. And maybe it's better that way. All I know is that I'll never watch Jurassic Park the same way again. Third story, to this day, I still get goosebumps just thinking about what happened to me that night at the cinema. I swear, it was the most bizarre and terrifying experience of my life. It all started on a Saturday night when I was doing my closing shift at the cinema where I work here in Newark. It was around 11:30 p.m., and I was alone, finishing up cleaning the lobby after the last showing. The place was dead silent, you know. All I could hear was the sound of my broom and the hum of the soda machines. I was kind of distracted, lost in thought, when suddenly I heard the front door open. My heart froze. I mean, who the hell would come into a cinema at that hour of the night? I turned around slowly and saw a guy standing at the entrance. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood partially covering his face. I was paralyzed for a second, not knowing what to do. The guy looked around nervously and asked, "Where's Mariana?" Mariana is my coworker, but she had left early that day. I stuttered a reply, saying she wasn't there. The guy seemed to get even more agitated and started pacing back and forth. I was scared shitless, but I tried to keep calm. I asked if he wanted to leave a message for her, but he just shook his head and ran out. I stood there like an idiot, holding the broom like it was a weapon. My heart was racing. After he left, I stood there for a good few minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My mind was racing, thinking of 1,000 possibilities. Was he some crazy ex-boyfriend of Mariana's? Or maybe an unhappy customer? I didn't know, but something told me it was more serious than that. I decided to finish cleaning quickly so I could leave. I started going through the theater rooms, checking if anyone had been left behind. Everything was normal until I got to the last room. When I opened the door, I felt a chill down my spine. Something was wrong. The air felt heavier, you know. I scanned the rows of seats and didn't see anything, but still, that strange feeling wouldn't go away. That's when I heard it, a noise coming from the projection room. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, I was pretty scared. But then, the noise repeated. It was like someone had dropped something in there. My whole body started to shake. I knew I should run away, but something made me climb the stairs towards the projection room. With a trembling hand, I slowly turned the doorknob and opened the door. When I opened the projection room door, my heart almost jumped out of my chest. There he was, the same guy in the hoodie who had come in earlier looking for Mariana. He was huddled in a corner between the projectors and looked as scared as I was. For a moment, we just stared at each other, not knowing what to do. I wanted to scream, run, call the police, all at the same time. But something in his look made me hesitate. It wasn't a threatening look, it was desperate. "Please, don't call anyone," he said in a low, shaky voice. "I'm Mariana's brother-in-law. I need to talk to her urgently." I stood there at the door, not knowing whether to believe him or not. My mind was racing, trying to decide what to do. He must have noticed my hesitation because he started talking fast, as if he was afraid I'd run away at any moment. "Look, I know this seems crazy, but Mariana's in danger. There's this guy, a drug dealer, who's after her. I came to warn her, but I can't be seen here." As he spoke, I could feel the fear in his voice, and I began to realize that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. I stood there at the projection room door, trying to process everything the guy had just told me. My head was spinning. Mariana, my co-worker, involved with drug dealers? It seemed like something out of a movie, not real life. But the fear in that man's eyes was too real to be fake. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I want to help, but I don't know if I can trust you." He nodded, as if he completely understood my distrust. That's when he started to tell me the whole story. Apparently, Mariana's boyfriend, his brother, had gotten mixed up with some heavy drug traffickers. He ended up owing a lot of money and disappeared from the city. Now, these guys were after Mariana, thinking she knew where he was hiding. I came to warn her to disappear for a while, stay at our parents' house in the countryside, he explained. As he spoke, I could feel my heart beating faster and faster. This was way bigger than anything I had ever faced in my life. I wanted to help Mariana, but I was also afraid of getting involved in a dangerous situation. As I was trying to decide what to do, I heard a noise coming from the cinema lobby. My blood ran cold. It was the unmistakable sound of the front door opening. Mariana's brother-in-law heard it too and turned as white as a sheet. "Shit," he whispered. "Did they follow me here?" My heart was about to burst out of my chest. Without thinking much, I pulled the guy behind one of the projectors and signaled him to be quiet. I went down the projection room stairs as quietly as I could, praying it was just some distracted customer who had forgotten something. But when I got to the hallway, I saw that the situation was much worse than I had imagined. There were 3 guys in the lobby, all looking mean. One of them, a muscular bald guy covered in tattoos, seemed to be the leader. He was shouting Mariana's name, turning everything upside down. The other 2 were searching the other rooms. I was shaking so much I thought I was going to faint right there. I knew I had to do something, but what? I couldn't just go out and face those guys. That's when I had an idea. With my heart in my mouth, I took out my cell phone and dialed 911, praying that the police would arrive soon before those guys found me or Mariana's brother-in-law. The minutes that followed seemed like an eternity. I was hiding behind the concession stand counter, trying to control my heavy breathing while I heard the guy's heavy footsteps approaching. Sweat was dripping down my face, and my hands were shaking so much I could barely hold the phone. I had just sent a message to Mariana, warning her of the danger, when I heard the bald guy's gruff voice. "Hey, girl, we know you're there. Come out now." My heart almost stopped. How did they know I was there? Slowly, I stood up with my hands in the air, feeling my legs wobble. The bald guy stared at me with a look that chilled me to the bone. "Where's Mariana?" he growled. I tried to stutter an answer, saying she wasn't there, that I didn't know anything, but he didn't seem convinced. That's when I heard the sirens in the distance. I had never felt so relieved in my life. The bald guy's face contorted with anger. He grabbed my arm hard, making me cry out in pain. "You little bitch, you called the cops?" Before I could answer, the front door exploded and a SWAT team burst in, shouting orders. Everything happened so fast, I barely had time to process it. 1 second, I was being threatened by the bald guy. The next, the place was full of heavily armed police officers. The bald guy let go of me immediately and tried to run, but he was taken down by 2 officers before he even reached the door. The other 2 guys didn't even try to resist, throwing themselves on the ground with their hands on their heads. I stood there, shaking, while the police handcuffed the criminals and searched the rest of the cinema. It was only when a police officer came to ask if I was okay that it hit me what had just happened. Tears started rolling down my face, and my legs felt so weak I almost fell. The officer helped me sit down and started asking questions, but I could barely answer. My head was a mess. That's when I remembered Mariana's brother-in-law. I looked towards the projection room, but there was no sign of him. At some point during all that confusion, he had managed to escape unnoticed. I spent the following hours giving a statement to the police, telling everything that had happened since the moment Mariana's brother-in-law first appeared. Of course, I omitted the part about him hiding and escaping. I'm not sure why, but I felt I owed him that. The police told me that those guys were part of a drug trafficking gang they had been investigating for months. Apparently, my 911 call ended up being the cue they needed to carry out the operation. It was almost morning when I could finally go home. My parents came to pick me up at the police station, worried sick. On the way back, I found out that Mariana had received my message and managed to leave town in time. She sent me a voice message thanking me and saying she was safe. This brought me enormous relief, but still, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened. In the days that followed, I had trouble sleeping. I kept going over every detail of that night in my head, wondering if I could have done anything differently. The cinema was closed for a week for investigation, and when it reopened, they installed a new security system. But even so, I couldn't feel safe in there anymore. Every strange noise, every suspicious customer reminded me of that night. A few months have passed since then, and things have slowly returned to normal, or almost normal. I never saw Mariana's brother-in-law again, and she ended up quitting and moving to another city. Sometimes I find myself wondering if I'll ever fully understand what happened that night. So many questions still unanswered. But one thing I know, that experience changed my life forever. Today, whenever I enter the cinema to work, I take an extra look at the shadows, just as a precaution. Because now I know that even in the most unlikely places, the craziest things can happen.